The moment Marcus Hale opened his eyes in that hospital bed, he knew exactly who had tried to kill him. But as his girlfriend Vanessa rushed to his side with perfectly rehearsed tears streaming down her face, he made a split-second decision that would change everything. He pretended not to recognize her at all. Hey everyone, before we dive deeper into this incredible story, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button because you won't want to miss how this unfolds. Trust me, this gets wild. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. 3 weeks before that hospital bed, before the betrayal, before everything Marcus thought he knew came crashing down around him. Marcus Hale had built his empire from nothing. At 38, he was the founder and CEO of Hale Technologies, a cybersecurity firm worth $3 billion. He'd grown up in a trailer park in Oklahoma, raised by a single mother who worked 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. Every dollar he made, every success he achieved, was carved out through blood, sweat, and sleepless nights. But success, as Marcus had learned, attracted all the wrong kinds of attention. He'd met Vanessa Carmichael at a charity gala in Manhattan 2 years ago. She was stunning, the kind of woman who turned heads when she entered a room. Dark hair that cascaded past her shoulders, emerald eyes that seemed to see right through you, and a smile that could make you forget your own name. She came from old money, Connecticut blue bloods who'd made their fortune in banking generations ago. Marcus had fallen hard and fast. For the first time in his life, someone seemed to understand the pressure he was under, the loneliness that came with being at the top. Vanessa had been there through the merger that doubled his company's value, through the Senate hearings when Congress grilled him about data privacy, through every triumph and setback. Or so he thought. 3 weeks before the accident, Marcus had been working late in his penthouse office overlooking Central Park. It was past midnight, and his head of security, Derek Chun, had already done the final sweep of the building. Marcus was alone, reviewing quarterly reports, when he decided to grab a file from Vanessa's desk. She'd been helping him organize his personal investments lately. He'd given her access to some of his financial documents, trusted her to help manage the charitable foundation he'd set up. Her desk was in the adjacent room, and he'd left a folder there earlier that day. That's when he saw it. The laptop screen was still on, brightness dimmed but not off. And there, in an open email thread, was a conversation that made his blood run cold. The transfer needs to happen before the end of the quarter, Vanessa had written. Once we have control of the offshore accounts, we can trigger the vote. With his shares diluted and the board convinced he's unstable, the company will be ours. Then we can finally be together the way we've always planned. The response came from an email address Marcus recognized immediately. Kyle Brennan, his chief financial officer. The man he'd promoted from junior analyst 6 years ago. The man he'd trusted with every financial decision in the company. Marcus's hands had trembled as he scrolled through the messages. There were dozens of them going back months. They detailed an elaborate scheme to embezzle funds from Hale Technologies, to manipulate board members, to paint Marcus as mentally unstable so they could force him out of his own company. But worst of all were the personal messages between Vanessa and Kyle. Messages that made it clear their relationship had been going on long before Marcus had ever met Vanessa. "I'm getting tired of pretending," Kyle had written. "Every time I see you with him, it makes me sick, but it'll all be worth it. Another few months and we'll have everything, his company, his money, his reputation. And he won't even see it coming." Vanessa's response, "I know, baby. I know it's hard. But I'm so close now. He trusts me completely. He even gave me access to his personal accounts. The man's so desperate for love, he can't see what's right in front of his face." It's almost sad. Marcus had stood there in that darkened office, the city lights twinkling below, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under him. Everything, every moment, every kiss, every whispered, "I love you," had been a lie. An elaborate con to steal everything he'd built. But Marcus hadn't gotten where he was by breaking down when things got tough. He'd carefully photographed every email on his phone, transferred the images to an encrypted server, and closed the laptop exactly as he'd found it. Then he'd gone back to his own desk and sat in the darkness, thinking. He could confront them. He could go to the authorities. But Kyle was smart, smarter than Marcus had given him credit for. The embezzlement had been done carefully, through shell corporations and offshore accounts that would take months to trace. And with Kyle controlling the narrative to the board, Marcus could find himself locked in legal battles that would destroy the company he'd built. No, Marcus needed to be smarter. He needed evidence that was ironclad. He needed to make them reveal their entire plan. That's when he'd come up with an idea so risky it might just work. Over the next 3 weeks, Marcus had played the role of his life. He'd been the loving boyfriend, the trusting boss, all while secretly investigating. He'd hired a private forensic accountant, paying in cash, using a burner phone, meeting in parking garages like something out of a spy movie. He'd installed hidden cameras in his office and his penthouse. He'd documented everything. But Vanessa and Kyle were getting nervous. Marcus could sense it. They'd been pushing for him to sign some new financial documents, to give Vanessa power of attorney, just in case something ever happened. The pressure was increasing. Then came the night that changed everything. Marcus had told Vanessa he was going to his lake house in the Adirondacks, a remote property he'd bought for privacy, accessible only by a winding mountain road. He'd asked her to join him, made it romantic, said he wanted to discuss their future. But he'd gone alone, driving his Tesla up that dark mountain road late at night, knowing that Kyle had access to his location data through the company's security system. What happened next, Marcus pieced together later from police reports and his own fragmented memories. Someone had hacked his car's computer system. Ironically easy to do when you had inside access to a cybersecurity company's tools. About 20 miles from the lake house, on a particularly dangerous curve overlooking a ravine, the car's brakes failed. The steering locked. The acceleration kicked in. Marcus had fought with the wheel, his knuckles white, as the Tesla careened toward the guardrail at 80 miles per hour. He'd tried the emergency brake, tried to override the system, but whoever had programmed the attack had been thorough. The car had smashed through the guardrail like it was made of paper. For a few seconds, Marcus had experienced the horrible sensation of falling. The car tumbling through the darkness, trees and rocks flashing past the windows. He'd thought of his mother, wished he could tell her goodbye. He'd thought of the empire he'd built, now being stolen by the people he'd trusted most. Then everything had gone black. Marcus should have died. The Tesla had rolled 300 feet down the ravine, smashing through trees, the battery rupturing, sparks flying. By all accounts, it should have been fatal. But sometimes fate has other plans. Riley Morrison had been hiking alone in those mountains, something she did every few weeks to clear her head and escape from her job as an emergency room nurse in Albany. She'd been heading back to her campsite when she'd seen the bright flash of the crash, heard the thunderous sound of metal crunching and trees snapping. Most people would have called 911 and waited. But Riley had spent 12 years in the ER, had seen things that would give most people nightmares, and had learned that in a trauma situation, every second counted. She'd scrambled down that ravine in the darkness, her headlamp barely cutting through the shadows, following the path of destruction. When she'd reached the car, smoke was pouring from the crumpled hood, and she could smell gasoline and burning electronics. A deadly combination. The driver's side was crushed, impossible to access. But Riley had managed to reach through the shattered passenger window, finding Marcus unconscious, bleeding from a head wound, his breathing shallow. She'd checked his pulse, weak but present. Then she'd seen the small flames starting to lick up from the engine compartment. What Riley did next probably saved Marcus's life. Despite the risk, despite the smoke and the flames, she'd climbed partially into that wreckage. She'd assessed his injuries as best she could by touch and flashlight. Suspected spinal injury, severe head trauma, possible internal bleeding. Moving him was dangerous, but leaving him was certain death. She'd braced his neck and spine as best she could with torn clothing and branches, and then, with a strength she didn't know she possessed, she'd pulled him from that wreckage. She'd dragged him 20 feet away, leaving a trail of his blood on the leaves and rocks, and had started CPR when his breathing stopped. 2 minutes later, the Tesla's battery had exploded, engulfing the car in flames that lit up the ravine like daylight. Riley had kept working on Marcus, breathing for him, compressing his chest, refusing to give up. And when the paramedics finally arrived 30 minutes later, directed by her 911 call. Marcus was alive. Barely, but alive. Which brings us back to that hospital bed. 3 days later, when Marcus opened his eyes to find Vanessa standing over him with tears on her face. Marcus? Oh my God, Marcus? Can you hear me? He'd looked at her blankly. Behind her, he could see Kyle Brennan, dressed in an expensive suit, his face arranged in an expression of concern. In the corner, a woman he didn't recognize sat in a chair. The police report would later identify her as Riley Morrison, the hiker who'd saved his life. Who? Marcus had whispered, his voice hoarse. Who are you? Vanessa's face had gone pale. Marcus, it's me. It's Vanessa. Your girlfriend. I don't. He'd let his eyes slide past her, unfocused. I don't understand. Where am I? The doctor had rushed in then, pushing Vanessa aside, checking Marcus's vitals while firing questions about his symptoms. Marcus had played it perfectly. Confused, frightened, unable to remember anything from the past 2 years. The accident, the doctor explained, had caused a severe traumatic brain injury. Memory loss wasn't uncommon in these cases. Will it come back? Vanessa had asked, and Marcus noticed the slight tremor in her voice. Fear or excitement? It's impossible to say, the doctor had replied. Sometimes these things resolve in days. Sometimes the memories are gone forever. Marcus had watched Kyle and Vanessa exchange a glance. Quick, almost imperceptible. But he'd seen it, and he'd known exactly what they were thinking. If Marcus couldn't remember the past 2 years, he couldn't remember the emails he'd seen. He couldn't remember his investigation. They were safe, or so they thought. The next 2 weeks were the most challenging performance of Marcus's life. He'd stayed in the hospital, undergoing tests, pretending to be confused and frightened. Vanessa had visited daily, playing the devoted girlfriend, telling him stories about their relationship, showing him photos on her phone. We met at a charity gala, she'd said, stroking his hand. You said I was the most beautiful woman you'd ever seen. We fell in love so fast, Marcus. We were planning to get engaged soon. He'd nodded along, watching her spin her web of lies, all while his private investigator, hired before the accident, continued gathering evidence. Kyle had visited too, playing the concerned friend and loyal CFO. Don't worry about the company, he'd said. I'm handling everything. You just focus on getting better. I'm sure you are, Marcus had thought. But the person who'd intrigued him most was Riley. She'd visited a few times, never staying long, always seeming uncomfortable with the attention she was getting for being a hero. She was different from the people in Marcus's usual world. No designer clothes, no perfect makeup, no agenda. She wore jeans and hospital scrubs, kept her auburn hair in a simple ponytail, and had eyes that were tired but kind. I'm just glad you're okay, she'd said during one visit. When I pulled you out of that car, I honestly wasn't sure you'd make it. Thank you, Marcus had said, and meant it. You saved my life. She'd shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. Just doing what anyone would do. But they both knew that wasn't true. Most people wouldn't have risked their own life to save a stranger. During his hospital stay, Marcus had also been visited by Detective Sarah Walsh from the New York State Police. She'd been investigating the accident, and her questions had been pointed. Mr. Hale, do you remember anything about the crash? Anything unusual about how your car was behaving? He'd played dumb, shaking his head. I can't remember anything from that night. The last thing I remember is, I don't know, maybe from 2 years ago. Detective Walsh had frowned. Your car's computer system was completely fried in the fire, but our tech team managed to recover some data. There were anomalies, signs that someone might have accessed the system remotely. Do you know anyone who might want to harm you? Marcus had glanced at Vanessa, who'd been standing in the corner during the interview. I can't remember. But he'd seen the way Vanessa had tensed, the way her hand had trembled slightly as she'd lifted her coffee cup. She was nervous. Good. Marcus was released from the hospital on a Tuesday. Vanessa had insisted he come stay at their penthouse, which had actually been his penthouse before she'd moved in 6 months ago. He'd agreed, playing the confused amnesiac, letting her guide him around his own home like it was unfamiliar. "This is our bedroom," she'd said, leading him into the master suite. "You had it redecorated last year. You said you wanted it to feel more like ours, not just yours." Marcus had looked at the room, at the photographs of them together artfully displayed on the dresser, at her clothes hanging in his closet. Every detail was designed to reinforce her story, to cement her position in his life. That night, as Vanessa slept beside him, Marcus had lain awake, staring at the ceiling. His phone was charging on the nightstand. The new one Vanessa had gotten him since his old one had been destroyed in the crash. She didn't know that Marcus had recovered his encrypted backup and had access to everything on his old device. At 2 a.m., he'd quietly gotten up and gone to his home office. The hidden cameras he'd installed weeks ago were still there, still recording. He'd downloaded the footage from the past 2 weeks, watching as Vanessa and Kyle had met in his penthouse while he'd been in the hospital. "He doesn't remember anything," Vanessa had said, pacing in front of the windows. "This is perfect. Better than perfect. We don't have to worry about him discovering the accounts anymore." Kyle had grabbed her, kissed her. "So we can move up the timeline. The board meeting is next week. I've been planting seeds about his mental instability. Now with the amnesia, it'll be easy to convince them he's not fit to run the company anymore." "And then," Vanessa had asked, "and then everything becomes ours. The company, the money, all of it. And he'll be so confused, so dependent on you, he won't even fight it." Marcus had watched this footage with cold fury. But he'd also felt something else: satisfaction. They were getting sloppy, overconfident. They were making mistakes. And Marcus was counting on that. The next morning, Marcus had made a call from his burner phone, one of several he'd hidden in his office before the accident. "Riley, this is Marcus Hale." There'd been a pause. "Mr. Hale? Is everything okay? Can we meet? There's something I need to tell you. Something important." They'd met at a small diner in Brooklyn, far from anywhere Marcus would normally be seen. Riley had arrived wearing her nursing scrubs, clearly coming from a shift. "What's this about?" she'd asked, sliding into the booth across from him. Marcus had looked at her carefully. In the 2 weeks since the accident, he'd had her background checked. Not because he suspected her of anything, but because he needed to know if she could be trusted. Former Army medic, deployed to Afghanistan, honorably discharged. 12 years as an ER nurse. No criminal record, no debts, no skeletons in her closet. By all accounts, a genuinely good person. "I need to tell you something," he'd said. "But first, I need you to promise me that what I'm about to say stays between us. At least for now." Riley had frowned. "If this is something illegal." "It's not. Well, I'm not the one doing anything illegal. But my life is in danger. And I think you're the only person I can trust." He'd told her everything. The emails he'd discovered, the plot to steal his company, the crash that was clearly attempted murder, and his decision to fake the amnesia to buy time. Riley had listened in silence, her expression growing more shocked with each revelation. "Why are you telling me this?" she'd finally asked. "Because I need help. Everyone in my life, everyone I thought I could trust. They're either in on it or they're too close to the company to be objective. But you risked your life to save a stranger. You're not part of their world. And right now, that's exactly what I need." "What kind of help?" "I need a witness. Someone who can document what's happening. Someone they won't suspect. I need someone on the outside who can go to the authorities if something happens to me." He'd paused. "And honestly, I need someone who gives a damn about me as a person, not as a meal ticket." Riley had studied him for a long moment. "This is insane. These people tried to kill you once already." "I know. And you're playing some kind of elaborate game with them instead of just going to the police?" "The police need evidence. Right now, all I have are emails that a good lawyer could argue were taken illegally, and a car crash that could have been a mechanical failure. I need them to incriminate themselves publicly, in a way that can't be disputed." Riley had shaken her head, but Marcus could see the wheels turning behind her eyes. She was thinking it through, weighing the risks. "What exactly would you need me to do?" The board meeting was scheduled for Friday. Marcus had spent the week playing his role perfectly. The confused CEO trying to piece his life back together, leaning heavily on Kyle's expert guidance for company decisions. Kyle had been pushing hard for Marcus to sign a temporary transfer of authority, giving Kyle power to make major decisions while Marcus recovered. The documents were already drawn up, just waiting for Marcus's signature. "It's just a precaution," Kyle had explained in Marcus's office. "The shareholders are nervous. They need to know someone's steering the ship." "I understand," Marcus had said, his voice uncertain. "But this is my company. I built it from nothing. And you'll get it back," Kyle had assured him. "Once you've fully recovered. This is just temporary." Vanessa had been there too, playing her role. "Marcus, honey, you need to trust Kyle. He's been running things beautifully. The company's in good hands." Marcus had looked between them, these two people who'd plotted his death, who even now were planning to strip everything from him. "Okay," he'd finally said. "I'll sign." He'd watched relief flood Kyle's face. "Excellent. The board meeting is Friday. We'll make it official then." What Kyle didn't know was that Marcus had already contacted every board member individually, using his personal relationships and encrypted communications. He'd sent them evidence of the embezzlement, the hacked car, everything. And he'd asked them to come to the meeting and act normal, to let Kyle and Vanessa think their plan was working. Friday morning had arrived with typical Manhattan weather, gray skies threatening rain. Marcus had dressed in one of his best suits, the armor of the corporate warrior. Vanessa had helped him with his tie, kissed his cheek. "Don't be nervous," she'd said. "This is just a formality." The boardroom on the 47th floor of Hale Technologies was exactly as Marcus remembered. A long table of polished mahogany, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, chairs occupied by 12 of the most powerful people in tech. And in the corner, wearing a visitor's badge, sat Riley Morrison. She'd brought a small video camera, claiming to be documenting Marcus's recovery for a medical journal. No one had questioned it. Kyle had started the meeting, his confidence evident. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. As you know, we're here to discuss the temporary transfer of authority while Marcus continues his recovery." "Actually," Marcus had interrupted, standing up, "we're here to discuss something entirely different." The room had gone silent. Vanessa had gone pale. Kyle had frozen mid-sentence. "You see," Marcus had continued, walking to the head of the table, "I've made a remarkable recovery. My memory has come back. All of it." "Marcus," Kyle had started. "Sit down, Kyle." Marcus's voice had been steel. "For 2 years, I trusted you. I gave you access to everything. I made you my right hand. And you repaid that trust by stealing from this company, by plotting with my girlfriend. Excuse me, ex-girlfriend, to take everything I built." Vanessa had stood up. "Marcus, what are you talking about? You're confused." "Am I?" Marcus had nodded to his head of security, Derek Chun, who'd been standing by the door. Derek had distributed folders to each board member. In those folders, you'll find detailed evidence of embezzlement totaling $47 million, routed through shell corporations controlled by Mr. Brennan. You'll also find emails documenting the plot to manipulate this board into removing me as CEO. And you'll find the forensic report from Detective Walsh showing that my car was hacked the night of my accident. Kyle had gone white. "You can't prove any of this." "Actually, I can. I've had 3 weeks to build an airtight case. 3 weeks while you both thought I was helpless and confused. 3 weeks while you got sloppy and overconfident." Marcus had turned to Vanessa. "Did you ever actually love me? Even a little? Or was it always just about the money?" She'd lifted her chin, defiant now that the game was over. "You were a Marcus. A lonely, desperate man with more money than sense. You made it so easy." The words had stung more than Marcus wanted to admit. But he'd nodded slowly. "That's what I thought." He turned back to the board. "I'm recommending immediate termination of Kyle Brennan, surrender of all stock options, and full cooperation with the criminal investigation. As for Ms. Carmichael, she's going to find that all the accounts she thought she'd accessed have been frozen. Every dollar will be recovered." The next hour had been chaos. Kyle shouting threats, Vanessa in tears, board members demanding answers, security escorting both of them from the building. Detective Walsh had been waiting in the lobby with handcuffs. Through it all, Riley had filmed everything, documenting every word, every confession, every moment of the truth finally coming out. 6 months later, Marcus sat in a coffee shop in Brooklyn, the same diner where he'd first asked Riley for help. The legal proceedings were still ongoing, but Kyle was looking at 15 years for embezzlement and attempted murder. Vanessa had made a deal, testifying against Kyle in exchange for a reduced sentence. The company was stronger than ever, the board's confidence restored, new security measures in place. But Marcus wasn't thinking about any of that right now. Riley slid into the booth across from him, 2 coffees in hand. She wasn't in scrubs today, just jeans and a sweater, her hair down around her shoulders. They'd been spending more time together lately. Not dating exactly, but something. "How are you doing?" she asked. "Better," Marcus said honestly. "Still processing everything, but better. You know, when you first told me your plan, I thought you were crazy. I was crazy, but it worked." Riley smiled. "It did. Though I'm pretty sure faking amnesia isn't in any self-help books about dealing with betrayal." Marcus laughed. Something he'd been doing more of lately. "I should write one. How to Trap Your Would-Be Killers. A Billionaire's Guide." They talked for an hour, about everything and nothing. About Riley's work at the hospital, about Marcus's plans for the company, about a movie they both wanted to see. As they were leaving, Riley paused. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything. When you first woke up in that hospital, when you saw Vanessa standing there, for even a second, did you think about forgiving her? About believing it was all a misunderstanding?" Marcus considered the question. "No, because I'd already grieved the loss of who I thought she was when I read those emails. By the time of the crash, I knew exactly who she was. The only question was how to make sure she faced consequences." Riley nodded slowly. "That must have been lonely, going through all of that without anyone to talk to." "It was. Until you." They stood there on the Brooklyn sidewalk, the city moving around them, and Marcus realized something. For the first time in 2 years, he felt like himself again. Not the lonely billionaire desperate for connection. Not the Mark who'd been played. Just himself. "Riley," he said, "would you like to have dinner with me? And not to discuss my case or my company or any of that. Just dinner." She smiled. "Are you asking me on a date, Mr. Hale?" "Marcus." "And yes, I am." "Then yes, I'd like that." As Marcus walked back to his car, a new one with security features installed by Derek personally, he thought about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the crash, the elaborate deception he'd had to maintain. It had been the hardest thing he'd ever done. But it had also taught him something important. Sometimes the people who save your life aren't the ones you expect. Sometimes they're the strangers who pull you from the wreckage, who stand by you when everyone else reveals their true colors, who show you that not everyone is playing an angle. And sometimes, getting everything taken away is exactly what you need to figure out what actually matters. Marcus's phone buzzed with a message from Detective Walsh. "Kyle's lawyer is pushing for a plea deal. Not happening. See you in court Monday." He smiled and put the phone away. There would be more court dates, more depositions, more legal battles. But Marcus had faced down death itself and come out the other side. Everything else was just paperwork. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. Let me know in the comments what you thought of Marcus's revenge plan. Would you have done anything differently? And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible stories.